Is the global economy maybe dangling on the edge of a cliff? Yes. Are Americans wildly unpopular in Europe at the moment? Yes. Could you get stranded if you moved to Europe and were not a citizen and found yourself in a place where you couldn't come home from? Also, yes. Am I letting any of these things stop me from moving to Europe? Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. I actually worked in diplomacy up until last year, and while it was not our job at the State Department, it definitely wasn't our job to tell people how and when to leave the United States. I can tell you that many diplomats, and myself included, would advise you that now is still a great time to leave, even with everything happening in the world, all of the uncertainty that's happening. And there's kind of like three components to this. The first one is the powder keg of stress that's being put on Europe right now in terms of migration. The second is the danger that you are in the United States. And the third is actually a way that you could be patriotic by moving abroad, believe it or not. So, number one, this powder keg of factors that's happening in Europe regarding migration is kind of in a place we haven't seen in a while. You might have seen, or you might not have seen, that Switzerland actually is proposing to cap its residents. And if this gets passed in June, that means that there's a precedent around Europe, and other countries who are sick of migrants could be very interested in doing the same. Portugal just doubled the amount of time that it takes for migrants to get their residency in Portugal. So that's something else that countries are doing. They're tightening their restrictions, making it harder and longer to get either in or to get residency or citizenship once you get in. And then Ireland news has been crazy in that for the first time, I think ever, more people from the US are migrating to Ireland than vice versa. So the country that is famous for being a source of migrants to the US is now suddenly the place where US citizens are moving to. And then you might have heard of a little something called this war in the Middle East. That is creating many new refugees every day, and you can imagine where those people are going to be trying to flee to. That's right, Europe. So all of this is stressing the infrastructure and the social nets and the other systems that are in place in Europe. And that coupled with, some maybe sentiment that's not the most positive about Americans could mean that there just continue to be roadblocks to you if you're someone from the US who's looking to move to Europe. And I mean, from a logistical standpoint, there are only a few weeks left until Europe says that it runs out of jet fuel. So you actually might not be able to get to Europe as a practical matter. And if you get stuck in the US and you can't even come for a vacation, you can't leave the country and come to Europe even temporarily, that's giving Fire Island. It's giving you're stuck in a disaster zone and you can't even get like a tiny little mentee bee break. So the second factor to consider if you're thinking about moving to Europe now and you're looking at the state of the world and you're not sure how you feel about whether this is the right time is that you're more in danger in the US than you are in Europe. I promise you, unless you're moving to Ukraine, or maybe Russia, the part of Russia that's in Europe. There's very few parts of Europe where you're going to be more in danger than you are in the US, be that physically in danger or in danger of, complications or financial issues arising from the healthcare or lack thereof in the United States. And this is complicated by the fact you may have seen that a lot of doctors and medical students are being affected by this focus on deportations, including, unfortunately, as you know, deportations of people who have a legal right to stay in the United States. So this Norwegian comedian I just was watching, she was talking about how Norway borders Russia and how she is, when she's talking to people, she's like, well, we know that the weapons aren't pointed at us, they're pointed at Washington, D.C. We're just going to see the smoke as the warheads are headed towards the U.S. And, that's a joke, but it's also a very real thing because the U.S. has some very traditional enemies who have been interested in finding ways to undermine and, in some ways, actually attack the U.S. And every day, new people who want to bring down the U.S. are being created through these adventures that the U.S. government is starting in places like Iran, in Venezuela, in potentially future adventures in Cuba or potentially Greenland. So the U.S. is a target from outside. It's also a target from inside. It's not funny because there's mass shootings every single day in this country. Literally in 2025, there were more than 365 mass shootings, so more than one a day on average. It's not a place that I would feel comfortable staying, and it's also a place that's not safe in terms of your health because more than 500,000 people every year go bankrupt from medical bills. It's not a joke. Okay, it's a new day and I'm in a new place with a new outfit because I ran out of battery on my camera. But this is actually the most important part of the whole video, so I couldn't cut it out. And it's that it's a particularly good time to move abroad because the US needs good representatives abroad now more than ever. You as an American can remind all of our European friends that 2/3 of Americans don't agree with the foreign policy of this administration, and that a large part of America still has, these sane views on our foreign partnerships and would like to have great transatlantic relations. So, I think it's really important to give hope to our European friends who I think some of which have lost hope. And I know, for example, for me, some of which have recently compared the US to countries that have long-standing dictatorships like Russia. And so I think kind of being brand ambassadors, for lack of a better word, for the US is something that's super important and going to be key in making sure people don't give up on the US and that they are aware that there's an election in a few years and that will be very likely reflected in our politics with a new leader that brings the US back to the international diplomacy table, and you can be a part of that. So highly, highly, highly recommend still moving abroad if you're thinking about it for all of these reasons. And keep following me if you want to see my own journey to move abroad and to be this kind of citizen diplomat for the US at a time when we need all the brand marketing that we can get.